Alright, I know I haven't posted a video in quite a few days. I've been very, very busy and just trying to keep to keep busy with what I'm busy with right now. I'm out of town. Not necessarily going to say where I am right now, but I'm about halfway between the two nearest Orthodox shuls. Excuse me. I've been davening at 1 Mincha Mariv all week. Shachris was too late for me to get back, so I just davened Nate's more or less. This morning I missed Nate's by a few minutes, but more or less, been going to shul at one of these two shuls because the other one, they're both just about a half hour away, so I'm going kind of above and beyond the call of duty by even going to Minyan, because it's more than Kadei Hiluch Mil. But since where I am right now, it's kind of on business, more or less, where I am for work. Definitely, we could say that. And I've been there all week. I got here Monday morning, and I'll be home for Shabbos, Mirz Hashem, Bezos Hashem, I hope. That's the plan, to go home tomorrow and then have to come back for another week here to the same location. So I've been having, been not allowed to bring the phone in to where I'm working. It's actually a training program for a job. So things are a little bit different. Just I go out to the car, lunchtime, check my email, learn a little bit, go back, for the rest of the training, and then, after the training's done, I've basically just been sitting in my car. There's a dormitory to stay in. I just basically go there to sleep, and I daven Shachris there, and that's about it. And Mincha Mariv, I've been going to Minyan. And it's been quite interesting because the first day I went to Minyan, I met some friends who I never met in person, but I've been talking to on the phone and online for some years. Heimische Chassidische, very ehrliche people, two brothers, Bachrim, and it's nice to meet them. And then the second day, I've taught in various schools in New York. Some of my students were on vacation in this town, and it's a small world. I meet them there in the shul. Very historical community with very famous history, very prominent rabbanim in their history. And I said to the Rav, I said, you have a big, you're Mamala Malkum, you're taking the place of such and such a gadol. I'm not going to mention who it is, even though he was in more than one town. This particular gadol was the Rav. I said, you have, it's a big deal. And he's like, I know it's on my shoulder. I said, no, but you have to take it in stride and with stolz, because you're like, one thing that advice I would give to him was like, he's a Talmid Chacham and he's an Anav. And there's another psula and there's another kshira. Another is a beautiful midah. Humility is a wonderful, wonderful trait. But especially a Rav of a shul, and especially a Rav of a town, basically, when you're a Rav in the only real Orthodox shul in town, Chabad doesn't count, and there's a Chabad rabbi during the week davens in the town shul. Unless Chabad is the only shul in town, a place like Boise, Idaho, where the only Orthodox shul is Chabad, so then the Chabad Rav is the chief rabbi. But if there's a regular, modern Orthodox American shul, and you're the Rav there, you're the chief rabbi of the town. You have a big responsibility, and you should take pride in it. And so like the Bachrim, the Rav said to them, "Are you staying for Mariv?" And he said, if you're not staying for Mariv, you could leave now. You don't have to stay here just to show me kavod, just to show me honor. And I don't think that's proper. I mean, you could say, thank you for staying. I appreciate you listening to me. It means a lot to me. Those types of things, I think, are more of a positive form of another. To say, you don't need to stay just to show me kavod. Well, that's their own business. Today's the yartzeit of Rav Avigdor Miller. It's a chusig and lein of Yisrael, amen. And I remember meeting Rav Miller at least 2 or 3 times. I know I attended his shiur twice, and I spoke to him. I have his autograph even. I bought one of his svarim, and he autographed it. He wrote in Hebrew in block letters bracha v'atzlacha, and in English he signed in script Rabbi Miller, and that's a very meaningful item that I have in my home. And I remember it took him a long time to write. But my Rosh Hashiva is a Talmud of Rav Avigdor Miller. He was actually the president of the shul. He was a balabas at the time at my Rosh Hashiva, Moshe Lazarus Shlita, and he was a balabas in the Young Israel of Rugby, where Rav Avigdor Miller was Rav, and he has a lot of very interesting stories about Rav Avigdor Miller. And one that I believe I heard from my Rosh Hashiva, although maybe I heard somewhere else, was that Rav Miller thanked someone for, by virtue of his presence there, his davening was with more kavanah. His prayers were with more sincerity and focus. And why am I saying this? Because that, I think, is a proper form of a nava. It's in a way, on a Musar level, it's reminiscent of the story of the Samarov, where he asked someone on Purim to imitate him, and he did so. And the Samarov started crying. He imitated the Samarov on Yom Kippur, his nusach in Yom Kippur, Kol Nidre, which was on Purim, and he had the reshus from the Samarov I believe it wasn't that the Samarov, I get it wrong. It's not that the Samarov asked him to imitate him. It's that the Badchen requested reshus. He requested permission from the Samarov to imitate him, and Samarov gave him permission, and the Samarov started crying. And he said, I didn't mean to offend the Rebbe. He said, no, you don't understand. It's not that you offend me. I gave you permission. What I mean by the reason I'm crying, the reason why it hurts me so much, is that I wonder to myself, am I just imitating myself sometimes? And I think that's along those lines with that level of intellectual honesty and self-reflection and cheshbon and nefesh. That's, of course, a tremendous source of inspiration and a role model for all of us. Is that these are the type of questions we have to ask ourselves. You know, am I just whatever? Am I just imitating myself? What gives me the opportunity to have kavanah? Meaning, like, do we have more kavanah when we daven with a minyan or not daven with a minyan? And sometimes it's different. And I know in my life, I've had certain times in my life, certain seasons in my life, I could say, that my prayers were much more inspired when I prayed alone. And they were usually less inspired when I prayed with a minyan. And depended what minyan I davened with, the level of inspiration that I felt. Now I would say I'm at a season in my life where it's a kind of the opposite. I do tend to daven by myself quite often because of my work requirements, and I'm quite often in a tremendous rush. I don't have time to invest in davening like I used to. I'm thankful that because in my past I did invest that time in davening, that now I can daven quickly and still have a certain level of kavanah because of the investment that I made in learning what the Perush HaMilos, learning the translation of the words and so forth, and the investment that I made in having times in my life when I would go daven and Toldos Saharan or Toldos Avram Yitzchak or Amunas Yisrael or Karlan Stolen, where the davening is a different type of davening, and perhaps now in my life I don't have that same patience that I had when I was younger. However, now I'm at a point in my life where, yes, if I just have to quickly daven mincha while I'm at work, or maybe, someone's waiting for me, so I can go to like a minion factory and just daven together with the what do you call it, with just the Chazaras Hashatz, and with only, not stay for the whole service, just do what I have to do and be there as briefly as possible, because on one hand it's already an accomplishment that I'm even davening with a minion, that I could just be davening by myself, and instead, no, I'm going out of my way to daven with a minion. That's already for me, an accomplishment because of my busy work schedule. Or like right now, where I'm driving a half hour specifically to go daven with a minion, which I don't have to do even according to halacha, but I have time to do. I also feel that, I need the chizuk that I receive from davening with a minion. But the fact of the matter is that I feel a tremendous amount of chizuk davening with a minion, that I would say, when I was a teenager in my 20s, I probably would have only gone to such a minion out of absolute, I would almost say, how do you describe it? I would go to such a minion out of that there was nowhere else to daven. I don't want to say it's necessarily like a desperation, but it's close to using the word desperation. Is not that far away to go to, that, me, I was so stoltzy that, Hasidish, I would want to daven with the Nusach Svard Minyan. I want to daven with the Hamish, I want to daven in the shul where the Rav wears a shtreimel, these type of things. And now, here I am, driving to a shul where the Rav doesn't even wear a hat, and it doesn't bother me in the least. And Adarab, I'm feeling tremendous inspiration davening there. Just stop, he's learning halachas between Mincha and Marav, and I'm putting in my input, and other people are as well, and he appreciates my input, and that's very inspirational. But also, I feel like I'm a transcendental experience sitting at davening in the shul and sitting and listening to the Rav learn Torah there, Barabim, together with the minyan. I feel a tremendous spiritual inspiration, and like I said, the words I could say, one of the nights for sure, and really all the nights of being there, was actually, I would say, a transcendental experience, a very spiritual experience, in a place where at a different season in my life would not be as spiritual. And now, so much of my life, so much of my religious life is just going through the motions, is just imitating myself. But Baruch Hashem, I thank God that I've invested in my life, that the things that I imitate myself on are essentially good practices. I've developed good habits, even though I have many, many bad habits. But I'm thankful that I have developed certain good habits in my religious devotion, in my religious life. I have developed, that, pretty much no matter what, on a regular Shabbos that's not a Shabbos Yontiv, I'm going to be at least reciting all the Zmiras. I might not sing them with a nigun, with a tune, all the Sabbath table hymns, but all the ones that I have accustomed myself to reciting, I'll at least read them, even if I just read them quietly to myself. And this way, on a day when I do feel more inspired, it'll be more than that. It won't just be, reciting. But on certain days, I will be singing them and with inspiration and feeling. And finding a spiritual source of inspiration. Like we said, that transcendental experience through the Zmiris. But the fact of the matter is, we should find in various religious devotions sources of inspiration. And that includes even the ones that we usually don't find. You'd be surprised. I mean, there's a story I remember Rabbi Orlovsky told us. I don't remember. There was a particular Askin, maybe from Agudas Yisrael. He had to meet Ben Gurion for some reason. And he saw it was almost Shkia. So he said, hold on a second, I got to daven mincha. And he davened mincha very quickly. Maybe, he said the whole Shemoneh Esrei in like 45 seconds, and most people saying it very fast takes at least, 90 seconds or 2 minutes, And Ben Gurion said to him, Rabbi, Kavod Rav, he probably didn't say it with that much of an Israeli accent because he was really a Polish Yid, Ben Gurion, but like, he tried his best to try to make himself sound Israeli, but he said, you call that a mincha? And the rabbi's answer was, no, that's not really a good mincha. That's not what davening mincha is supposed to be. But I'll tell you what, it's worth it to daven mincha like that every day of my life, to daven 3 times a day like that every day of my life, that maybe one time in my life I'll have a real inspired, proper prayer. Maybe one time in my life. Now, obviously we should have goals of more than just once in our life, to be inspired in our prayer liturgy, in our prayer life, in our devotions, in our religious devotions, whatever your religion is. I mean, I'm just speaking from my own religious experience of being Jewish. But that being said, the end of the story was that Ben Gurion said to this rabbi, he said, what, I never thought of it that way. It's taka, it's worthwhile to daven 3 times a day, that maybe one time in your life you should have a good real davening. And and the point in saying that, it's going back to what I said. Like I said, today's the yartzeit of Rav Avigdor Miller, and where Rabbi Miller said to this Eid who was davening near him, that your presence made my davening more. All the time you'll hear a Musar idea that basically they'll tell you, whatever you do in public, you should do much better, much more in private. And that's how the Gedolei Yisrael generally conducted themselves. But I think Rav Avigdor Miller was intellectually honest with himself on his level, because he wasn't a tremendous tzaddik. But the point, what I want to say, is that he recognized that even though you're supposed to not show off in front of other people, you're supposed to be humble, you're supposed to how do I say it? There's a little bit more that I want to say here. You're supposed to be more spiritual in a sense when nobody's looking. Like you hear the stories of the Gedolim who, they would think nobody's around and they would say Asher Yotzar, and with tremendous, like show-off level, because they figured nobody's around. and someone happened to be around, and I think the story of the Chaim was that there was a bacher, I think it was a Yekisher bacher, he happened to be by the sons of Rav, by the Chaim, and this bacher walked in while sons of Rav was saying Asher Yatzar, and the sons of Rav said that it was worth it for you to come from Germany to Galicia just to learn that you should say Asher Yatzar with the same kavanah, or really with more kavanah, than you say in the Sana Toikif, which is, on the very moving liturgy of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. Why? Because Asher Yatzar is a bracha, and the Sana Toikif is not a bracha. The famous, who by fire and who by, that Leonard Cohen made into a song, And the point that I wanted to bring out here is that, Rav Avigdor Miller was intellectually honest with himself that even though indeed there are many stories of people walking in on him with tremendous religious devotions that would go above and beyond and how he tried to be a Hatznei Aleches, how he tried to walk humbly with his God, how he, as Micah says, as the Navi Micha says, that he tried to hide his tremendous tzidkis, but he wasn't able to hide it. Maybe there was a lot more that he hid that we don't know about, but there's plenty that we know about. But that being said, Rav Avigdor Miller, he recognized that when people are around, it inspires you to feel like you do have to show off a little, and that level of insincerity can sometimes lead to sincerity. That mitoich shaloi lishma ba lishma, that through doing something that is right, even in an insincere way, as long as it's not outright negatively anti-sincere, but it's just lacking a level of sincerity, that through engaging in an action that might lack sincerity, you will actually come to sincerity. And by being mindful of these things, one comes to appreciate what we have in the world, what we're here to accomplish. And so I would say, I was going to address this local Rav here directly about it, but the fact of the matter is, I'm sharing it on the public forum not to embarrass him, because nobody knows which town I'm in right now. I haven't really advertised it on social media or anything, exactly where I am. I guess people could find out where I am, but the fact of the matter is, like I said, the place where I'm staying is equidistant between at least two Orthodox shuls, so it's not necessarily the one that or the other, and so I'm not revealing. And the Rav is a fine Erlich Yid. I'm not saying this to embarrass him. I'm saying this because really, in reality, there's certain things that a shul Rav has to know, and hopefully, I'm hoping that other shul Rabbanim will hear these things and grow and take them seriously. I mean, I made another video where I gave advice, to Rabbanim, particularly young Rabbanim. It may be their first stellar. How to approach, your position as a Rav of a shul and so forth. And, there are certain little tricks that I think are smart. I think it's very important to be involved in your community, both in your Orthodox Jewish community, in your general Jewish community, and in your general community both of all of your neighbors, both Jews and non-Jews. That's certainly how I conducted myself when I was Rav in Richmond. And even though I'm not currently a Rav of a shul, I'm an assistant rabbi in a shul, but I've tried to the best of my ability to engage in some of these things to a certain level. And little things that go a long way and that are meaningful. I mean, this particular shul, they have something that they do every year for the general community that I think is quite beautiful. And I mentioned something about it to the Rav, and he's like, yeah, I think I want to do away with that. And I was like, no, I don't know if he heard me. It's like, no, you have to do it. It's such a Kiddush Hashem. It's such a beautiful thing that the shul has done for many years. Probably giving away too much here. And so I don't mean to, because a lot of people might know what I'm talking about. But this being said, there are so many good, wonderful, and especially it's so hard to establish something like that, because I've tried to establish events, to establish things, and it's a very uphill battle. And the fact, so that piece of advice, that the fact that you have something like that is so important that you have to hold on to it, no matter what it is. And the same thing could be true no matter what your religion is. I could be talking to clergy of other faiths as well. But another bit of advice is, yes, you're the chief rabbi of this town. You have to take that seriously. You should, in a way, even though, yes, this is America, and it's not the way it is in Europe, thank God, I really despise, personally, the way that there are chief rabbinates in Europe and in Israel and so forth, more so in Israel than in Europe, on one hand. But on the other hand, I recognize I don't mean that I despise the chief rabbis. What I mean is I despise the way that the government operates the synagogues in many European countries and in Israel. The way it operates, for example, in Germany, it's pretty much the same how it operates in Israel. That I really despise. But the idea of an office of a chief rabbi, I think, is very prominent and important. I just don't think the government should be involved in it. But that being said, it's a story that I tell often, that they asked Rav Teitz, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, Rav Pinchas Teitz, of course, since I said Zecher Tzadik Levracha, why did you go to Elizabeth? And his answer was, and he stayed in Elizabeth. And the and so now his son Rebbe Lazar, he was in Mamala Mokim, and even though Rebbe Lazar didn't have his own children to be Mamala Mokim, but he's still essentially the chief rabbi. It's just that each shul has their own rabbis, but still Rebbe Lazar Teitz is still chief rabbi of Elizabeth. And the answer that he gave, because they said you could have, Elizabeth is not such a big community. It's not a small community, but it's not a huge community. You could have, gone to Brooklyn and had your shul in Brooklyn could have been bigger than the whole Jewish community in Elizabeth. Certain shuls in Brooklyn, now it's a little different. It's not quite the same how it was, but in those days, for sure, especially when there were fewer shuls and so forth in Brooklyn, for sure, he could have had a shul in Brooklyn that in those days that was much bigger than the whole Jewish community of Elizabeth. And the answer he gave was as follows. And I tell this story over and over, and it's a very important story. Was that he had heard that, of course, we know that Woodrow Wilson wanted America to be in the League of Nations, and the Congress voted against it. And the League of Nations actually continued to exist, although it was very weak not having America in there, and I'm quite happy that America was not in the League of Nations, and I see Woodrow Wilson as probably the worst president of the 20th century. Although many people obviously would disagree, and many people love Woodrow Wilson, but I went to the Woodrow Wilson Museum and stuff. I don't necessarily hate him personally, but his ideology and so forth, I strongly disagree with. He's definitely, in my opinion, the worst president of the 20th century, Woodrow Wilson. Although Jimmy Carter could be close, but the fact of the matter is that Wilson did much more damage and much stronger damage and much longer lasting damage. And Wilson, to certain things, I think were malevolent in his ideology. I think Jimmy Carter actually meant well, because Jimmy Carter is a very moral good person. He just was a, you know, like on The Simpsons, America's history's greatest monster. Maybe I wouldn't put it that far, but he was definitely more than a mediocre president. He was a very poor president, but I don't think he meant to be. I think he tried his hardest. He just, it also was his ideology and so forth. But all this being said, years later, when LaGuardia became the mayor of New York City, and he was a very colorful character, and so LaGuardia contacted the League of Nations. He said, "I want to send a delegate, a representative, an ambassador from the city of New York to the League of Nations." And they said, "No, you can't do that because New York City is a city. It's not a country. You don't have the right as a city to send a delegate, to send an ambassador to the League of Nations." And he said, "Yeah, but New York City is bigger than Luxembourg, has a bigger population than Luxembourg. Why does Luxembourg get a delegate, get an ambassador, and New York City doesn't?" And the answer is, well, that's because Luxembourg is a country and New York City is a city, and that's the answer. And so Rav Tait said that Musar Haskell he got out of that is that to be a chief rabbi of the whole city of Elizabeth, New Jersey, in a certain sense is a bigger chashivas than to be just a rav in a shul in a town that has many shuls. And that's the truth. But just some other advice that I have as far as, how, and other rabbis do this, but just it's very good ideas on how to be a shul rav. One thing is sell the chametz. I said this in another video. Sell the chametz to someone who is a distinguished person. Don't just, not that I have any disrespect for the human dignity of a janitor. A janitor can be a very dignified person. But the reason why I'm saying this is as follows. Make an event out of it. Make an event that there will be pictures in the local paper, both in the Jewish papers and in the national, international Jewish papers, and they will print your pictures. And in Hamadiyah, Yated will print the picture of you selling your chametz, no matter who you sell it to. But if you're selling it to the mayor, if the mayor's not Jewish, or if the mayor's Jewish, you're going to sell it to even, I generally would sell it to some politician. When I was Rav in Richmond, I had two people I sold chametz to. One was a city councilman, and one was what do you call it? Was a galach, a friend of mine. He was a Baptist minister. He wasn't actually a pastor of a church. I mean, he was actually very involved in things in the Jewish community. He was a docent in the Holocaust Museum. I believe he still is. He's a very philo-Semitic person, as many, evangelical Christians are, in a sincere way, not just as a ruse to convert Jews. They really believe in this stuff. It really means a lot to them as Christians. Many Jews are so suspicious that, it's they're just doing this to convert Jews. I'm not saying that's not part of it, but it's not the whole thing. And so this is who I would sell chametz to. Those were the two, and we'd put the pictures in the paper, and and I would send it to local papers. Local papers usually wouldn't print it. But then I would send it to Hamadiyah and the Yated, and the Hamadiyah and the Yated did print it. And then, the shul would have tainas on me. Well, how come it's in the Hamadiyah and the Yated and not in the local paper? And I was like, I don't know. I sent it to all of them, and and the answer is, you should really follow up on something like this. A phone call doesn't hurt to ask, could someone print this picture or so forth? And they usually are looking for things to put into the papers, in the especially in in smaller cities and so forth, and especially, if you're especially in this day and age, but it's always been that way, there is a fascination, a human interest fascination with religious minorities. And so, to, have something as an Orthodox rabbi in the local paper is quite meaningful, and it's something that the papers really enjoy having. And they understand that people will buy the paper because your picture is in there, and other things like that. Your congregation will probably go and buy the paper, and the congregation probably wants it to help grow the shul and to show, look, we're active in the community and we have relationships with other people in the community. There's a lot what to talk about. Other examples of things that a shul rav should do. Absolutely go speak in the local college. Be in touch with professors who teach world religion courses. And I would say particularly Gentile professors who teach courses in world religion. They quite often love to have guest speakers in their college. It makes their job a little easier, but it also enhances the educational experience of their students. To have, there was a Professor Smith, I'm sure he's still there at VCU, who would have me come and speak in his class, and not only myself, but he'd have pastors and imams and so forth and priests come and preach about their religion as well in a course on world religion. And I believe that that is a very important thing for rabbis to be involved with. It's a tremendous Kiddush Hashem. You have to know what you're doing, though. You have to know, you have to be polished, you have to be prepared. So to any event that takes place in your Jewish community, you should go to, whether if you're able to. Obviously, your schedule doesn't afford for everything, but if you're a full-time rabbi, I would feel that it's part of your job to attend as many community events as possible, whether it's at the JCC, Jewish Federation, a Jewish Film Festival. Those things are important, as well as interfaith. I know Orthodox rabbis don't like to be involved in those things. I know Orthodox rabbis believe it's wrong. And it's true. All right, you have to ask your own Das Torah how to approach these things. But my experience has been that if you're interested in Kiruv, which at one time in my life was something that I was interested in, now maybe a little bit less so, or my approach is a little bit different. But you would be surprised who you're going to meet. I mean, I went to an event that was held at a church. I didn't go into the sanctuary of the church. The event was 3 weeks in a row, that 1 week was at a church, 1 week was in a mosque, and 1 week was at a Reform Jewish temple. I happened to be busy the week when the Reform event was. I went to the events in the church and the mosque. At the church, I didn't go to the sanctuary. Again, like I said, although that's not to say that on other occasions I wouldn't or haven't. I mean, the chief rabbi of England goes to the cathedral when the prince gets married and so forth. There are reasons that it's proper and fitting for a rabbi to attend certain occasions like that. But over there at this event in a church, a young man approached us. He said he wanted to convert to Judaism. I said, all right, come over for Shabbos. We recognized after a while that he was actually Jewish all along. His mother was Jewish, and his father was also probably from some kind of a Jewish background, but probably not Jewish. But his mother was absolutely Jewish. you could say there was some kind of shilas. So we made a gir l'chumra, and again he made another gir l'chumra, and when they were approached him about making a second gir l'chumra, I said, as long as they're not charging you money, go and do it. But this bacher went on to study in yeshiva for years, and he's frum now. And if I hadn't gone to this event in a church, if I would have been too frum to go to an event like this, who knows where this boy would be today? And now he's frum. And maybe that's something that's meaningful to you. And to me, the most important thing is this is what he wanted. He was struggling and trying to get into Yiddishkeit, and this is what he personally wanted. And there were so many obstacles in his way, and Hashem helped, and it's a big schus that I was a part of that, one of the tools that Hashem used to bring that about. Some other examples, just other things. But again, it depends. Are you comfortable with these things? I would say if you're not comfortable with these things, you really don't belong being a Rav in a small modern town. You belong in Muncie or in Monroe or something. And even in Muncie and Monroe, we really need some people like this who will be good ambassadors to the community outside. And there are wonderful askonim, including Rabbanim, who do fill this role, but we could use many more in Brooklyn and all over, and not just Chabad. There need to be normal mainstream Hamish, whether it's Hasidish, Litvish, Modern Orthodox. We need some good mainstream rabbis who are going to be there, for the community, and make a Kiddush Hashem, and go be involved in communal affairs. Now, other things that I personally have done, one thing that I've done in White Lake is, as often as is feasible with my schedule, I worked on the Board of Elections, and especially in a lot of small towns, they have a hard time looking for election workers, and even in some big cities. And to sit there on election day and hand out ballots and get to know my neighbors and see my friends who I do know and get to meet new people, it's a tremendous opportunity, and it's a big Kiddush Hashem. Now, then I don't sit there with my rekel and my Bieber hit. I dress more like I'm dressed today. I'm only dressed like this today because the training that I had today, all week long, I dressed very Hamish Chassidish with a white shirt and a vest. First day I had a flannel shirt, but the past 2-3 days, whatever, white shirt. Today we were doing more of a gym activity, so they told me to wear a t-shirt, and this is what I was wearing for pajamas, and I just kept on, I'm going to go to shul now, put on a rekel and a hat, a chalat, whatever. Not that I always daven like that, but I don't know, I feel like I need that chizik also. I've had a lot of nisyonis being away from home and so forth. But what other things we could say to a local shul rav? I think those are some of the most important things. Sell the chametz to someone, whether it's a local celebrity. I know there was one small town rav. I don't remember which town it is. I mean, it's a mid-sized city rav, but I think the only Orthodox shul in town, perhaps other than Chabad, modern Orthodox rabbi. He was very smart. He sold his chametz to Warren Buffett, and that's a very good idea. Some years ago, I don't remember the whole story. Where was he live in Wisconsin or something? Not in Wisconsin. Wherever it is, Minnesota. I don't remember. But that being said, that's a very smart thing to do. Be involved. Reach out to people. Reach out to the community. Let people know that you're there for them. Another thing that I have to say, and Orthodox rabbis make this mistake all the time. don't alienate anybody in your community. Doesn't matter. You might be an Orthodox rabbi in a shul that's maybe 20% Shomer Shabbos and 80% people driving to shul on Shabbos. Some rabbis, Orthodox rabbis, only can relate to the Shomer Shabbos people, and they alienate the other people. Others, who are very Kiruv-minded, are focused solely, and this is particularly in Chabad, but it happens also in Eshet Torah affiliated shuls and so forth, that they're affiliated only with the non-observant people. A lot of times that's often because the Rav could be a total Am Haaretz, just to be honest, and that's a major reason why he doesn't relate to the Frum people. And on the other hand, he could be too much of a Talmud Chacham for a particular shul on the other side, and that's why he doesn't relate to the non-Frum people. But all that being said, you have to find a balance. You have to know what you're dealing with, what, when, why, how. You cannot alienate anybody in your shul. If you are a Rav in a shul out of town, for sure, and even in town, you have to welcome everyone who comes into your shul. Man, woman, child, a Frum Jew, a non-Frum Jew, a non-Jew. Doesn't matter. You have to be menschlich. You have to find some common ground. That's why I do believe it's important to have some type of popular culture that you're interested in, that does interest you, but it's really l'shem shemayim, whether it's movies that are clean movies, whether it's sports. I mean, I'm personally the movie guy. A lot of rabbis are sports guys. I personally don't understand it. Whether it's history, whatever it is. And also be familiar with the history of your community. Be intimately familiar with it. Know as much as you can about every Rav who served as Rav in your community, even before your shul. Try to find the history, the historical aspects. If they wrote a sefer, where are they buried? Are they buried in your town? On their yartzeit? Go make a pilgrimage with your balabatim. I know it sounds like a Hasidic thing, but people enjoy these things. If you can encourage people, make a yartzeit suda. For if you have a Rav from 70, 80 years ago, an Orthodox rabbi buried in your town, you should be at his kever on his yartzeit, and you should make a yartzeit suda in the shul, or at least in your home, even, or at least the Shabbos around the yartzeit. Something should be mentioned about that. And there might be some old timers who still remember that Rav. You might have someone who's 90 years old who still remembers, like we had in Richmond, a Rav Pabelevich, and I could not find that much information about him, but you better believe it. On his yartzeit, I was at his kever, and usually a few times during the year, I would go daven there. If I had guests, Chassidish Bochrim, they like to do things like that, go visit Kvarim, I would take them there. I would show them where it is. If they had time for something like that, and if they wanted to, and people enjoy things like that. And if you can get, I know, in Buffalo, there's a Chassidish Rebbe buried in Buffalo. So, a friend of mine from Kiryas Yol, every year on the yartzeit of that Rav, brings a whole bunch of Bachrim and Yungalite to spend Shabbos there in Buffalo, and they go daven by the Tzion, and it's a chashuv thing. I was in Buffalo once, but I didn't go there. Didn't have time. It was too far out of my way. I never went with my friend there. I think it's time for mincha. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe. But the thing is, it's not only should the people from Kiryas Yol be going to Buffalo, the Balabatim, the local Balabatim, and especially the Rav of the Shul, should be attending something like this. You cannot say, "Oh, this is a Chassidish Zach, and I'm a Litvaka." No. It's an event in your community that you should be encouraging people to attend. And even as much criticism as I have for Chabad on Yud-Tes Kislev, you better believe it, I was at the Farbrengen on Yud-Tes Kislev most years if I was able to make it. And not all the time, not every event Chabad does, because I don't want to be pushing them too much. But that, I feel, is an appropriate time to show a certain level of solidarity and even appreciation to local Chabad. I don't do that currently. But when I was in Richmond, that's what I did. And I do believe that there are times when that's appropriate. I don't know if I believe that it's appropriate to invite the Chabad Rav to do that in your shul. If it's a Chabad shliach who doesn't have his own shul or something, it might be better to be in his house, or it might actually be better to be in your shul. Depends on the situation, and that's something that's a community by community question. I would say most likely, though, if he doesn't have his own shul, and if you're friendly with him and you don't think he's going to steal your shul away from you, you don't think he's going to steal Balabatim away from you, which is something that Chabad does all the time. But if you're lucky enough that in your community you have one of the good ones, maybe it's worthwhile to have it in the shul. Maybe not. That could be something that is worthwhile just to keep things, to keep him from opening his own shul, at least for the time being. Things like that. So these are the things you have to think about. But other events, so the same thing. Even events in Reform and Conservative shuls, there is a time and a place. Even if ideologically you have some issues with it, if it's something like Yom HaShoah, and maybe you have, and I have ideological issues with Yom HaShoah, but if that's going to make a Kiddush Hashem for you to attend some event in the Holocaust Museum in town, or in the JCC, I think personally the International Holocaust Memorial Day might be a better day with my hashkafa. But if your hashkafa has no problem with Yom HaShoah, and even I, who do have a hashkafic issue with Yom HaShoah, I would attend that. I would attend at least one or two events that relate to Yom HaShoah. Depends on the community, though. The same thing. Hey, whatever your approach is, even sometimes just attending to show a certain level of solidarity, and you're not participating, and you're not being insulting. There, it depends on your hashkafa. Me personally, I am not that comfortable with any celebration connected to here, but you have to ask that yourself. And if yes, you should be involved. And if you're a Zionist, all the more so. But particularly if it's a shul, if it's an inter-community event, don't be too frum for that type of stuff. All right. Well, thank you for watching. And if you are too frum for that type of stuff, go move to Muncie. Go move to Brooklyn. Oh, I can't find a job there, and that's why you have this job in East Podunk, because eventually, it'll be on your resume. You were there for a few years, and then you'll be able to get a job in Brooklyn. My experience, it's not necessarily so. If you're too frum with certain things, you're going to lose out even on the Brooklyn jobs, even on the Muncie jobs. So maybe you should consider a different line of work. There are a lot of things you could do as a rabbi. Chaplaincy is a wonderful one. And if you're a chaplain and making a good living, you could open your own shul. That's also an option somewhere. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe. Comment all the best. Thank you.